Oh. Sorry about that. I had to go somewhere a bit more private. Anyway, this is Penguin. I'm sorry about yesterday. I forgot to do a live stream because I was kind of busy. But anyway, I'm gonna be listening to some creepypastas and watch some videos. If you don't like these type of creepypastas, make sure you leave the video, or if you can handle them, just as long as you don't get nightmares. Cause anyway, I'm gonna start this one. Dang it. Oh god, that sounds awful. That sounds kind of disgusting.
Bounded by the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the boreal forest. The entirety of the land was
Sorry about that anyway.
converted into residential homes when agriculture stopped being profitable. In total, our community is surrounded by a vast expanse of ocean and a seemingly endless barrage of trees. I spent most of my life hunting in those woods, so you can imagine my joy when my parents got me a hunting dog. And while they are more fit to be herding and tracking sheep over grassy plains rather than rabbits and deer through the dense forest, it didn't stop me from taking him on every excursion I possibly and rabbits through the considerably large area of forest. Sandy wasn't my property, and he wasn't treated like he belonged to me. Ready to go for a walk in whatever part of the forest I took him to. I can honestly October 30th, the first day of hunting season. And I'd been talking with my family about taking Sandy and my hunting gear and some essentials to one of the cabins my grandfather owned in his heyday off an unmarked road a few hundred miles into the wilderness. This was met with a lot of protesting, but nothing could stop me from getting in some time looking for wild game in an area that wasn't already picked clean by illegal hunters earlier in the month. I spent most of my life in the wilderness. There were only a handful of times that things had gotten really weird for me, but usually everything can be explained with scientific reason. That's why I brushed off Sandy's weirdness on the first few nights, chalking it up to being nervousness of a dog that's capable of hearing far-off noises of various coyotes, wolves, bears, and moose. This next to the TV that looked like it came out of the early 90s. I figured I'd give Sandy the option to have some place to lay down for a while, despite the fact that he slept curled up with me 9 times out of 10. Close to about 10 p.m. at night, Sandy looked straight at the wooden door and whined. I figured he needed to stood and looked for a few minutes before deciding that he had just heard an errant critter close to the cabin. He'd been walking a few miles through the woods beyond the house. He hunched himself on his hind legs, his front pressed close to the ground.
Hold on a sec. Okay, sorry, let's continue.
His mouth pulled up over his teeth, and he growled toward nothingness. I figured we'd try hunting again later, if whatever it was had left, and should he be feeling up to it. But once we were inside, he didn't want to move. Even when I tried to get him to go outside and do his business, he just sat at the door and cried, wailing at me to let me know that he didn't want to go out there. I didn't pressure him. The third night is where things went to hell. For the day, I cooked it up, threw a little gravy on it, and gave it. He didn't so much as sniff at it.
Sorry about that. Okay?
Watching the doorway intently, I tucked him under one of my arms, and he laid his head on my lap, eyes still locked on that door. Close to 3 hours of watching grainy VHS tapes on an outdated television set, Sandy started crying and hugging himself close to my body. This is where my judgment took me down the wrong path for the first time of many. It must sound silly, being my dog's protector rather than the dog being mine, but this was my family. I figured if there was something out there that was staring into nothing. There was barely a sound, save for the faint buzz of insects and leaves rustling into the darkness of the trees beyond the path, barking wildly. I started to get worried, despite my knowledge that my dog isn't entirely helpless in the wilderness. There was still a bigger animal that was waiting in the woods. I waited for hours for Sandy to come back to the house. I waited until sun was cracking the 3 days. Fog had rolled in at that point, and it was getting darker. The night painting the sky, and Sandy out there, lost in the woods, cold, and probably hungry. The thought that he might be waiting out there, my father would help me find Sandy. He was a retired, graying man, but I was sure if I brought up Sandy's name, he'd be more than willing to help me search the house. Normally, I'd hear him scamper to the doorway and paw at the door a few times, eager to come in, but this was different. I could see the reflection was unmistakable. Still, despite myself, I hesitated. There was something different about his body language. I stared out the window for a few moments before reason overcame my gut instinct. Sandy could be hurt, I thought, or worse. I flung the doorway open, but he didn't come right away. Instead, he stood there, watching me intently, and when he didn't move, I whistled to him. "Here, Sandy!" I coaxed him toward the house. "Come on, here, boy!" The way he moved was different. It was as though his hips had been dislocated, and the angle of his paws changed direction with every step, as though he'd forgotten how to walk properly. His body was bowed to the ground, but his teeth weren't bared. He didn't seem aggressive. The only way I could describe the look he gave me was sheepish, like he'd just gotten into something he wasn't supposed to, and I had yelled at him for it. I thought he might hurt himself hopping up onto the elevated step if he dislocated his hips, but he did just fine. His back half swung a little, oddly enough, and his paws almost folded underneath himself, but he didn't go sprawling. He sat on the step and didn't take his look off me. It wasn't until I had moved from the doorway completely, opened the door wide, and waited for him to walk in that he moved. Straight to his bed. He didn't stop at my hand or sniff at me. He didn't wait for pets or jump up on me like he used to. It was just straight to his bed, where he sat and watched me for quite some time afterwards. I returned to the movie at hand. I called him a few times, but he didn't respond. His ears didn't so much as raise to the sound of my voice, or the pat of my hand on the worn-out couch beside me. I'd missed my buddy, but I wasn't about to move him physically toward me. And a few hours later, I went to bed. The more I think back on it, I don't recall him blinking once. He just sat there like a statue. Wow. And when I turned off the light, I could still see the reflection of jade green following me as I went into my room and shut the door. I could have sworn that I heard him walk in the night. The sound of nails clinking against the wooden floor coming up to the door of my room. But they were slow, and it must have been a dream. Sent me into the kitchen, but he paused the way he looked that being out in the wild for so long and called out his name loudly. Sure enough, there were birds I found out the reason why the animals are drinking water that is close to where their food.
Oh my god.
Most body stopped and delved them of the skin over a. I moved from a walking pace through the forest to a jog. Thankfully, the cabin wasn't too far off. I heaved one final time, wiped my mouth off on the back of my sleeve. It's stupid to think of it now, but at the time, it was the only reasonable back into the boxes. With my only companions, the horizon, and we were bathed in a navy blue sky once again. I did, glancing at him for just a moment. It was a passing thought that he was looking a little longer today, and when I went to bed, sleep for the next few hours. It must have been close to 4 or 5 in the morning when I heard it. It was the sound of whistling, the same whistle I used to call my dog. I broke out into a cold sweat when I realized that whoever slaughtered those squirrels and hung up that skin and left what he didn't need could have very well broken into my house. The door to my room didn't make a sound as I opened it slowly, thankfully. I waited for a moment, listening to someone call my dog for a few more seconds, before I dared poke my head out the door frame to get a good look at whoever it was that could have hurt Sandy. The outside door was open. All I saw was the back half of Sandy, too long and lanky, almost coiled around the back of the door. His front half was outside. Whatever it was that was impersonating my dog, it was whistling slowly, calling for Sandy, when I could have sworn that it hunched down to the ground again and said, in the most ungodly voice I'd ever fucking heard. I closed the door just as softly as I'd opened it. I don't know how long I waited with my back pressed up against the door. I knew I left my gun and my bag on my coat rack. I know I didn't sleep. I waited until I saw the sun break over the horizon, and then waited some more, until it must have been midday, and I finally got the balls to open the door again and make a break for it. I wouldn't die in that place. Sandy was gone, and the door was open. His food was untouched, but the fridge was open, and all the meat was gone. I didn't bother packing his stuff. I just threw my bag over my shoulder, made my way to the floor as fast as I could, and turned on the ignition. I couldn't describe the feeling that overcame me as I realized that I'd have to leave Sandy in this place. The thought that he could be dead was never a thought in my mind. I didn't think I could cope with the knowledge that whatever I allowed in my house, whatever disemboweled those animals, could have taken me back to that house. But when I reached the pavement on the stretch of road that led back to town, I felt relief wash over me, thinking I was safe. Just as I was pulling glass and tumbling into the back seat, I cried. I could tell you that it was the end of it. I tried to be sleeping for a while and laid there. I advise you don't let them out of your sight for too long.
Wait, how long have you been quiet on? I'll watch one more video. Check his ads.
Yeah, I know. I realized halfway through that it was the song. If you're happy peeing on stuff so other people know it's mine, and you know I clap and you know I clap your cold pussy. Beautiful. Okay, John, I appreciate